Hi everyone, it's Karen the Geordie Grandma. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I'd do a favourites video, but because I haven't actually bought much or done much during July, I'm going to do a retro favourites. So I'm going to tell you what my favourites were back in the 80s. I absolutely loved the 80s. I was in my 20s during the 80s, so it was a brilliant decade for me. I just loved everything about it. So I'm going to go through a few things that I really liked in the 80s that may not have been a good idea when I look back, but there you go, that was the 80s. So I've got a few things to go through, from books to hair to TV and films, things like that. So we'll get cracking with books. What was I reading back in the 80s? It was mainly trashy, what I would call trashy fiction. So I loved Jackie Collins, read a ton of Jackie Collins books. I think one of my favourites was Lovers and Gamblers, which was about a singer, a huge superstar singer called Al King, in this prostitute turned model called Dallas, who the trials and tribulations of the book are them two, trying to get together. I've read that book more than once. I've read it several times. I just really like it. Another trashy novel I read was Jilly Cooper's Riders. Very like Jackie Collins, but a little bit more kind of set in this country, set in the UK, and the horsey set. So obviously called Riders. It was about show jumping. So the main bad guy was a guy called Rupert Campbell Black, and the good guy was called Jake. Can't remember his surname for some reason, but it was all about them. And how they met their wives, and how they got on in show jumping, and all of the argy-bargy that goes on in that world. Really enjoyed that book. Again, read that several times. Really enjoyed it. I also read a lot of Sidney Sheldon back in the 80s. Loved Sidney Sheldon. Quite a departure from Jackie Collins and Jilly Cooper's. They were more kind of thriller type of thing. And one of my favourite Sidney Sheldon books is a book called If Tomorrow Comes, which is about an ordinary woman who works in a bank. She gets set up by the mafia and ends up going to prison. And the book is all about how she becomes stronger in prison. She gets out and she takes her revenge on the people that set her up. And then she becomes a con artist, like you do. So I really enjoyed that book as well. So that was books. Moving on to makeup. I don't remember a lot of the actual brands that I used back in the 80s. I do remember a very blue eyeshadow just across the lid. You would wear really blue eyeshadow, lots of blusher. One brand of makeup that I do remember using was a foundation called Leichner. It's either Leichner or Leichner, not quite sure how you pronounce it. And it was in a little black tub, and the foundation was really thick and creamy. There wasn't many shades, if I remember rightly, and I think I used to use the shade, it was either peach or biscuit. I'm leaning towards it being biscuit, which was probably the totally wrong colour for my skin tone, because I'm quite pale, and this was quite a dark foundation, and you used to layer it on really thick. Makeup probably was actually terrible in the 80s. But Leichner was a popular foundation, and I did use it for quite a long time. But like I say, used to layer it on really thick, and it was probably too dark. Hair in the 80s was big hair, and I seem to favour, for some reason, perms were really popular in the 80s. Now, I've got quite fine hair, and I always had fairly short hair, this length, maybe a bit longer, this maybe shoulder length. And I always used to go into the hairdressers and ask for a corkscrew perm. Well, of course, just because you ask for a corkscrew perm doesn't mean that's what you're going to get. Corkscrew perm, for those of you who don't know, it looks like a corkscrew. It kind of very loose, windy curl, which never ever worked on my hair. The hairdressers never used to tell you this, that, they just used to, I want a corkscrew perm. Oh yeah, sit down. And I used to end up with these tight curls that only looked like a corkscrew perm probably the week before you were due to get your hair permed again. So perms, although were my favourites in the 80s, were probably the big fat fail of that decade. How many of you out there had perms? Horrendous things. I'm pleased they got rid of them. Next we'll go to film. Now there is so many good films from the 80s. I could sit here all day and talk about films from the 80s. There was just so many fantastic ones. But a couple that really stick in my mind that I really liked was The Lost Boys, which is about vampires. Probably where I developed my love of vampire programs from. Loved The Lost Boys. I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I've watched Vampire Diaries. I've watched True Blood. I've watched the originals. Love anything vampires, and that probably is where it came from. The Lost Boys. I was a big fan of Kiefer Sutherland. Just brilliant film. I watched it recently. I think we went to watch it at a drive-in movie a couple of years ago. It's not as scary as I thought it was in the 80s, but I still enjoyed it. Iconic film. And I also remember, because there wasn't many films on the TV, particularly in the early 80s, I don't think we had Sky in the early 80s. I think it was more towards the late 80s that we maybe got Sky. So we used to go into video shops, that rented videos that you actually put into a video machine. Used to spend ages looking around the video shop for something suitable to watch. And when videos first came out, you'd stand in there ages looking for them because they weren't really well-known films. You used to just have to read the blurb on the back and take it home and hope for the best, and 9 times out of 10 they were complete rubbish. I remember watching some really horrendous films from the video shop. But Lost Boys was one of my favourite. And also another favourite, which is completely different to Lost Boys, was a kind of romance called Some Kind of Wonderful. I can't remember the guy's name that was in it, but he was also in Memphis Belle, and I think it was Mary Stuart Masterson, I want to say, was in it. And it was about a guy who was a bit geeky and didn't have many friends, and his best friend was a tomboy girl, and she was in love with him, and he was in love with a popular girl at school, and it's a love story. I've watched that quite a few times, and I really love the film. So if you did enjoy that kind of film back in the 80s and you haven't seen Some Kind of Wonderful, I do recommend you go and watch it. On to music from the 80s. I didn't really have any favourite bands, I would say, in the 80s. I wasn't particularly into Michael Jackson or Madonna or anybody like that. I think I preferred individual songs rather than, bands, everything they did. And I had quite an eclectic taste. I still have got quite an eclectic taste. So I liked everything from, heavy metal to full-on pop songs. So just a few songs I've picked out that would have been my favourites back in the 80s. I really liked Only You by Alison Moyet. I still like her songs, still play them now. Particularly like that one. You can't talk about the 80s without talking about Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So Relax had to be an absolute favourite in the 80s. If you ever went to discos, Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Relax was always played, and everybody would be up on the dance floor. Really liked that. And another song is a little bit different, more rock, was Uriah Heep, and their song was On the Rebound. Love that record. The intro to that, just, I love it. Just if you haven't heard it, go and listen to it. On the Rebound, Uriah Heep, brilliant song. Clothes in the 80s. I wouldn't say I had a particular style. I've never been kind of a trendy fashion setter, but I do remember jumpsuits in the 80s. Loved jumpsuits. I had quite a few of them. One I particularly remember was a really bright orange one, and it had zips in the legs and zips on the arms and zip down the middle. I loved that jumpsuit. I thought I was the bee's knees in it. I was a size 12 at the time, so I don't think it would suit us now, but I loved that jumpsuit. I think I wore it to death. And I mainly shopped it. Remember Chelsea Girl? I loved Chelsea Girl. I used to get all my clothes from there. And I think it was where I got my first store card. Big mistake. I don't get things like that anymore, but I got a store card from Chelsea Girl, and I think I maxed it out within a few weeks. But I was always at Chelsea Girl on a Saturday. Had some quite nice clothes in there. I remember wearing kind of high-waisted jeans that were cropped with a crop top. I think that was one of my favourite outfits. It was like a turquoisey blue. I really liked that outfit. Again, wouldn't fit us now, but there you go. So that was clothes. Food in the 80s, probably not tons different from now, but I do remember lean cuisines, frozen ready meals that were calorie counted. I was forever on diets, not just in the 80s, I'm forever on a diet that don't last very long. But lean cuisines were a new thing, I think, in the 80s, and there was quite a good range of different meals. The one I remember most was the zucchini lasagna. I don't know whether a lasagna was quite a trendy thing in the 80s. I think it was quite new to the UK. But zucchini lasagna was a favourite. And there was an oriental beef that was quite a favourite. I wasn't vegetarian back in the 80s. But yeah, I was constantly on diet. I remember going to this Weight Watching club. It wasn't Weight Watchers. I think it was just called Slimming. That was it, Slimming. I don't know whether that morphed into Slimming World or whatever, but it was only called Slimming. And you used to calorie count, and lean cuisines was one of the meals that you could, you got on your sheet of things you could eat. So I used to eat that quite a lot. And it was a strange slimming thing because it had a thing where you could, I think you had treats, and you had so many calories for treats, but if you didn't eat all your treats in one day, you could save them up and have them once a week. And I think I decided that it was alcohol that I was saving, so I would end up with, like, I could drink 50 vodkas or 25 halves of cider on a Friday night, which probably wasn't a good idea. But that was a slimming club. But yeah, definitely, lean cuisines were a favourite of mine back in the 80s. I don't know if you can still get lean cuisines. I think you can, I haven't seen them in Sainsbury's, but I'm sure you can still get them. So we move on from food, and the last thing I remember as favourites from the 80s is television stuff, obviously. And one of the programmes, I think it was a made-for-TV film, and it really, really sticks in my memory right up until today. And when they wrote about it in the papers, they used to put the night the country didn't sleep, and that was about watching this film, and it was called Threads, and it was about a nuclear bomb. I think there was a lot of talk back in the 80s about nuclear war, and everybody was worried about it. And this was called Threads, and it was about a nuclear attack on the UK. And I think the film centred on a couple in Sheffield. It was a young couple who, at the beginning of the film, they're about to get married, she's pregnant, and then this atomic bomb goes off. You see the big mushroom cloud and the reactions of everybody, and the story kind of follows these people, through the attack and how they get on in their lives. I think it goes 10 years into the future or something like that. But it was a really, really scary film, really scary. Not scary as in, a horror film, but the thought of it. And I think because it was set so locally, in I think, like I say, I think it was set in Sheffield. And because it was in the UK and not like this big Hollywood blockbuster type of film, it made it more real. And I think it really did put the fear of God into people. And like I say, the papers were saying Threads, the night the country didn't sleep. And if I think about that film now, I still get shivers. I haven't seen it played on the TV or on Netflix or anything since. But do you remember it? Does anybody remember that? What did you think? Did you find it scary? If you did see it, just let us know in the comments below what you thought of it. Yeah, it definitely terrified me. A couple of other TV programmes that weren't terrifying. One was A Vida Sane Pet, obviously. Back in the 80s, you didn't have Geordies on the TV. Apparently, you couldn't understand her. What are you on about? My Geordie accent is perfectly fine. You can understand every word I say. But A Vida Sane Pet was brilliant programme. If you don't know what it is, it's about 3 Geordie workers. I think 2 of them were bricklayers. No, they were all bricklayers. Three of them were bricklayers, and they were from Newcastle, and they couldn't get work in the 80s, so they went over to Germany to work, and they met up with some other lads there, and there was 7 of them that got friendly, and it's about their exploits while they were in Germany. That was the first series, but of course I think there's been another 4 series since then. I've watched all of them. I'm actually re-watching the first Avida and Pet series now. It's so funny. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's really good. It's quite dated, but it is good. And last but not least, I can't do an 80s favourite video without talking about Dallas. Now, who didn't watch Dallas in the 80s? Fantastic. They don't make programmes like that anymore. Brilliant characters, JR, Bobby, Pam, Sue Ellen, brilliant characters. And the iconic shower scene where at the end of one series, the character Bobby was killed off because the actor Patrick Duffy didn't want to be in it anymore. So they killed him off, and they did the whole next series, where Pam, his ex-wife, is mourning him, and everybody's missing Bobby, and the series goes on. And right at the end of that series, Pam wakes up in the morning, full makeup, perfect hair and everything like they did, goes into the shower, opens the shower door, and there stood Bobby in the shower, and she says, "I had this terrible dream." It was so stupid. How ridiculous. The whole series was a dream. So the start of the next series, obviously, they went back to where they left off in the series where he died. Ridiculous. But just a fantastic series. I loved it. It was so impossible and ridiculous, the people. Lots of big hair, lots of shoulder pads. Just excellent. And the spin-off Knots Landing I also really liked as well. It's a shame they're not on the TV at the moment, on Now or Netflix or something like that, because I'd love to watch Dallas and Knots Landing again. So those are my favourites for the month, not from July this year, but my favourites from the 80s. And of course the one big fail was the perm, definitely. So I'd love to know what were your favourites of the 80s, from any of those categories or anything that wasn't in those categories. What did you love about the 80s? Just let us know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel and you think you might like to see more of these, I do favourites videos, I do haul videos, and I also do what I sold on eBay videos, because that's my job. I sell stuff on eBay. So if you think you like that kind of video, just hit the little subscribe button, and then hit the bell, and you'll get notified when I'm uploading a new video, if that makes sense. Sorry about that. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again really soon. So bye for now.